Chapter 809 The Seven Pillars 2. What is he planning? When Jezebeth looked at Ren, his eyes narrowed as he tried to comprehend the motivation behind Ren's continued opposition to him. As opposed to before, the very air around him changed and the world around him started to collapse. It was only thanks to Jezebeth that it remained intact. The tension in the air was palpable and Jezebeth's crimson eyes flickered dangerously. "Is this really your decision?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Ren's expression remained unchanged and Jezebeth's frustration grew. "Do you understand the consequences of your actions?" he threatened, gesturing toward the projections that surrounded them. Each frame held a different individual and Jezebeth could see humans and members of the three races. Their situation. It wasn't good. In fact, it was terrible, and each second hundreds if not thousands of individuals died at the hands of the demons. It was a slaughter. "If you choose to fight me, by the time our fight is over, everyone will be dead. Your friends, your lover, your family. Everyone will die. Do you really wish for that to happen?" Jezebeth expected Rin to flinch, to hesitate, to show some sort of emotion. But Rin just continued to stare at him with that same unnerving gaze. "Even now as we speak, people are dying," Jezebeth continued, his voice rising with his frustration. "You don't seem to care about their lives, but what's the point of all of this? If you don't care about them, why do you even bother fighting against me?" The question hung in the air unanswered and Jezebeth's anger simmered. Why was Rin doing this? Was it to spite him? For what reason? Were all of his preparations for nothing? Why? Swish! He bellowed, the sound echoing through the room and causing the projections to flicker. "Why?" Finally Rin spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried an air of finality that made Jezebeth's face stiffen. "The reason is simple," Rin said, his gaze shifting toward the projections. "My job is to kill you. As for the others..." The space around one of the projections distorted, and Jezebeth realized too late what was happening. Small Snake, who was only a few meters away from him, disappeared, and Jezebeth turned to look at Rin, who was looking at him with a smile on his face. "That's a job for another person." His voice gently spread across the space and Jezebeth felt his entire body tremble. "You." Jezebeth's voice trailed off as he looked at Rin, his anger boiling over. To be honest, if he wanted to, he could have probably stopped Small Snake from leaving, but he decided that it wasn't worth it. He could tell from Ren's eyes that he really didn't care whether he lived or died, and keeping him was pointless. The same was true for the people who were dying within the projections. He could tell at a glance that they were of no concern to him at the moment. "You really..." Jezebeth clenched his teeth, his lips curling into an annoyed smile. "Piss me off." Drip, drip, drip. Thick raindrops pounded against the deserted streets, collecting into small pools along the streets. They reflected the dim light that filtered through the thick clouds in the sky. The sky was gray and overcast, casting a gloomy and eerie atmosphere over the empty town. "Where is this place?" I wondered, looking around me and finding a tiny deserted town nestled on the coastline of what seemed to be an island. Fush, fush. The waves hit the coastline with a relentless force, crashing against the rocks and sending sprays of salty water into the air. The sound of the waves was deafening, a constant roar that echoed throughout the surrounding landscape. As each wave approached the shore, it rose up, building in size and intensity before crashing down with a thunderous boom. I frowned at the sight in front of me. Upon closer observation, the town in the distance seemed to be made of human architecture, and it looked abandoned and forgotten, with overgrown weeds and moss covering the once well-maintained buildings. "I've never seen such a place on Earth. Where in the world is this place?" Splash. I took a step forward, my foot splashing against one of the puddles, ripples forming outwardly on the surface of the water. When I looked down at the puddle, I gazed at my reflection. My entire body was dark, almost shadow-like, and while I could see my features, there was no color in me. Suddenly, a screen appeared in front of me and I looked at it with a mixture of complex emotions. It's been a while since I've last used this skill. Who would have thought it could have been used this way? Dark Servant. It will grant the user the ability to summon a shadow servant for an extended period of time. There will be 50% resemblance between the shadow servant and the user in terms of skill and strength. Cooldown period, 5 days. I tore my gaze away from my status window. Indeed, just before Jezebeth appeared, I switched my body with the other me and became what I was now. It felt rather uncomfortable moving in this body, but at the same time I didn't feel any strangeness from it. I practiced fighting with this body several times and there was no problem with it. I could perform just as well as without this body, and in fact I was a bit stronger than my usual self. That was just how big the difference between the other me and me was. Just 50% of his strength was about the same as my current strength. It's not all too bad. There was something that was unaccounted for in the skill. The fact that I gained my other self's skills while retaining my own. With the two combined, my power rose even further. Whew. I took a deep breath, scanning the world around me. When I closed my eyes, I expanded my mana outwardly and tried to feel for any life that was in the vicinity. The island was rather big and it took me quite a lot of mana to get a proper view of the entire island. Only when I got a good feeling of the entire island did I open my eyes and let out a deep breath. If I'm not wrong, this should be the Pillar of Envy. I didn't know much about these pillars, but the conversation between the other me and Jezebeth was transmitted inside of my mind, and I came to understand that this was a world within those enormous pillars that crashed against Earth not too long ago. How troublesome. Out of all pillars I had to enter the hardest one. Even so, I wasn't discouraged. My task was to help as many people as possible and reduce the casualties on our side. Beating all the heads of the demon clans was impossible for us yet. There were a couple of things I had set up beforehand, but I wasn't too confident of them working out. Perhaps so, but that didn't really matter in the grand scope of things. I could fight against one head, but I couldn't fight against all 7. Even if I wanted to fight against one of them, by the time our fight was done, almost all of those on our side would have perished. What I need to do right now is stall for as much time as possible. Be it by saving people or getting the attention of all the big shot demons in here. I have to stall enough time for the other me to kill Jezebeth. So long as he managed to kill him, everything would come to an end. Everything was in the other me's hands, and I could only pray that he'd be able to beat Jezebeth. He hadn't told me what his plan was, but he reassured me that all I needed to do was save those I wanted to save. He would take care of the rest. The only problem, however, was the fact that I couldn't use the laws. Since our powers were directly connected, if I used the laws, I'd be directly affecting his fight against Jezebeth. In fact, just me being here was severely affecting his fight, as Dark Servant took a lot of mana. Whew. Thinking of the situation, I took another deep breath. For now, I'll start with those on this pillar. Once I'm done, I'll go to the other pillars. Taking a step forward, my vision blurred and my surroundings changed. Chapter 8 Tennum 1. Fush. Fush. My feet eventually came to a stop on a rocky surface, and as they did so, waves crashed against the firm surface of the rocks, spraying salt water all over me. It was refreshing, and yet it made me more alert. As I looked around, I noticed that there were a few people off in the distance. They were encircled by a number of demons and monsters, and with just one look, I could tell that their situation was quite precarious. I'll give them a hand. When I stretched out my hand, the demons that were surrounding the group instantly disappeared, leaving them stunned. I didn't linger any longer and quickly moved away from the location, continuing my journey further into the interior of the island. Every time I had the opportunity, I would wipe out all of the demons that were within my line of sight. There were quite a few of them, and the last time I counted them, I discovered that their total number exceeded the tens of thousands. As I made my way through the island, I couldn't help but think about the world. Why was the location like this? Why did the landscape look like something that came from Earth, and why an island? There are a lot of demons. I muttered to myself, closing my eyes and feeling the demons that were within the island. And if that isn't bad enough, I can sense over 1,000 demons that are ranked from count rank and above. The odds were overwhelming. Even I was not confident in handling so many demons, and this was just one pillar. I could only shudder at the number of demons within the other pillars. Despite the overwhelming odds, I refused to give up. This should be a good spot. I stopped on a large patch of land and waved my hand. A white barrier formed around me, sealing everything around me. I've moved far enough. I shouldn't get noticed even if I use this skill now. As I swept my hand in front of me, a map of some sort materialized in front of me. There were a few red dots on it, and on top of each one was a name. It was Soul Linkage, one of the skills that used to belong to Kevin. I was able to learn about this ability after gaining access to his powers, and I put it to use right away. With Soul Linkage, I could find out how everyone was doing and where they were. It was an extremely useful skill that would help me locate those who were in danger and provide them with the help they needed. I couldn't use it carelessly because of the possibility that it would attract the attention of one of the heads with how unusual the laws were. As a result, I had to look for an ideal location where I could use it before I could do so. It was also for this reason that I only killed the demons that were within my line of sight. I wanted to check soul linkage as fast as possible. Let's see if there's anyone that's any. I froze mid-sentence as my gaze paused on a few dots on the screen in front of me. Thump. Thump. No, why? What? My heart pounded out of my chest and my body stiffened. What? How? Didn't he say? Thump. Thump. I muttered under my breath. I acted before I even realized. Channeling the laws within my body without any restraint for them, my vision blurred and I disappeared into the shadows. No. Get back. A deep voice echoed through the dense forest, bouncing off the trees and rocks as three figures emerged from the foliage. Swoosh. A man, a woman, and a teenage girl ran frantically away from a hulking, menacing figure that was making its way toward them with calculated ease. Ronald, get back here. You're not a match for it. Samantha screamed in terror, her voice cracking with emotion as she watched her husband take a defensive stance with a sword in his hand. So what? Ronald's face was usually stoic, but now he showed rare signs of emotion as he pointed his sword at the looming demon. His body stood firmly before his wife and daughter, his eyes blazing with determination. I'll hold them back for now. You try to find a way to contact Rin. As long as you contact him, you'll be fine. Just. Ronald's words trailed off as he struggled to catch his breath. The demon in front of him exerted a pressure unlike any other, and he felt troubled by it. His sword arm shook with the effort of holding it steady, and even standing was hard for him at that moment. But even in his weakened state, he was not going to let anything happen to the people he cared about. Not on his watch. At least this way I'll prove that I'm not useless. It was ever since Ren's stunning growth that Ronald felt it. His own uselessness. Ever since Ren came to power, he realized just how much of a burden he was to his own son, and it had been eating him up almost every day. Even so, he kept it hidden to himself and did everything he could to keep his family safe. Just like now. What he was doing, it was for them. He had to do it. It was his duty as a father. Go. No, Ronald. Samantha's voice was barely above a whisper as tears streamed down her face. She had known her husband for quite some time now, and in all those years that the two of them had spent together, his back had never felt so large. Mom. Nola's voice trembled as she clung to her mother's side, her eyes wide with fear. Samantha's heart clenched at the sight of her daughter's scared expression. She grabbed Nola's hand tightly, knowing that they had to get out of there as soon as possible. Let's go, Nola. We don't have time, we have to run. Samantha's voice was strained with emotion as she tried to remain calm for her daughter's sake. But Dad. Nola's voice was barely above a whisper, her eyes fixed on her father's back as he faced off against the demon. I know, sweetie. But we have to trust that he knows what he's doing. Samantha tried to keep her voice steady, even as her heart was pounding in her chest. With a heavy heart, Samantha pulled Nola along with her as they made their way deeper into the forest. Tears streamed down the side of her face as she forced herself not to look back, not to see what was happening to her husband. Our Rin will take care of it. We just have to run for now. We'll see him again very bang. Before she could finish her sentence, the forest shook with a loud, thunderous crash. The ground beneath their feet trembled and Samantha stumbled, nearly falling to the ground. What was that? Nola's voice was shaking with fear as she clung to her mother's hand tightly. Samantha's heart was pounding in her chest as she looked in the direction of the noise. And then she saw it. A large tree, taller than any other tree in the forest, had been split in half by an unseen force. The sound had come from the impact of the tree as it crashed to the ground, sending shockwaves throughout the area. And then she saw him. Her husband lay crumpled next to the fallen tree, his sword lying just out of reach. No. Samantha's heart felt like it was being ripped out of her chest as she fell to her knees. Beside her, Nola was in no better state as tears streamed down her cheeks, her gaze fixed on her father who lay on the ground, lifeless. Dad. She called out. She was met with no response and her entire body started to shake. What she was experiencing, It wasn't something that she had ever experienced before, and her entire chest ached. A lot of memories came flooding in at that moment and her eyes blurred. Thump. But she didn't have the time to mourn. Just then she was awoken by a rough step, and when she turned her head, her gaze fell on the large, burly demon that was responsible for all of this. Her gaze burned with hatred at the sight of the demon, but at the same time, it burned with fear as she fell back and retreated. "Mom." Nola called out for her mother, but when she turned her gaze, she found her staring at her own hands and muttering some words. "No, you can't leave." She didn't even notice that the demon was upon her, and Nola's heart despaired. "No, Mom, no." She screamed, rushing to her side, but she was slow. Unlike her demon, she had only recently started to feel her mana, and thus by the time the demon raised its hand she had only taken one step. "No." Nola screamed in despair, her gaze fixed on the large hand that was approaching her mother. Her despair grew even further at the sight, and just as she thought her mother was also about to leave her, a crack formed above the demon's head, and a black hand came grasping from above. It clenched the demon's head tightly and smacked it against the ground with frightening power. Crush! The entire earth shook and a figure emerged shortly after. Despite being entirely black, Nola recognized it immediately and tears welled up in her eyes. "B brother." Chapter 8:11 Num 2. Drip. 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 "It can't be, no. You are." Incomprehensible mutterings, a loud wail, and the sounds of rain dripping against the ground. All of it reached my ears and yet at the same time didn't. Standing where I was, my mind was blank. I couldn't think of anything, and the noise around me came from one ear and left from another. I was numb, so numb. Staring at the figure that lay before me, I didn't know how to react. "He's dead." I tried to check up on him moments prior, but his heart and breath had stopped. There was nothing I could do at the moment, and it was this sense of helplessness that made me numb. Why did it have to happen again? Why did someone else have to leave me? Especially my father, of all people. The one person I was supposed to protect? I closed my eyes, the rain still trickling down my face. Images of the past flashed in my mind, moments that I had shared with my father. Is this how he felt? At last, I was able to understand the constant agony that the other version of me had to endure on a consistent basis, and I noticed that something was beginning to eat away at my chest. Ha. Breathing was becoming incredibly difficult at the moment, and if not for me being used to this, I would have already lost it at this point. Not yet. I can't show weakness just yet. I held back everything that was threatening to come out at that moment and kept it to myself. There would be a time later when I could show weakness. The time wasn't now. Not yet, at least. The rain continued to pour down, drenching my clothes and making me feel cold. The only sound that could be heard was the sound of raindrops hitting the ground. "B brother." It was upon hearing Nola's voice that I turned around. The pain that I was feeling further intensified when I caught her gaze, and I raised my head to look up. She had grown up since I had last seen her. With the time she spent in Amora, she was now 14 years old, a teen. She had grown into a beautiful young girl and was no longer the little girl that I used to know. Unlike before, she was aware of what was happening, and I couldn't bring myself to look at her. "B brother." She called out again, but I didn't respond. I didn't want to face her. To see the look of sadness and confusion on her face. Drip. 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 The silence was deafening, the only sound being the raindrops hitting the ground. It was as if the world had stopped for a moment, frozen in time. "B brother, answer me." The rain masked her soft whimpers and my heart ached at the thought. I really wanted to go to her at the moment and give her a hug, but I stopped myself. Now was not the time. Not yet. I couldn't mourn just yet. Not when I still didn't have the time to mourn Kevin's death. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. It was hard, but this wasn't the first time I lost someone important to me. I had already readied myself beforehand and was somewhat prepared. Even so, it hurt like hell. "Nola, Mom." I called out to my family, my voice trembling as I struggled to contain my emotions. The weight of my father's death hung heavily over me, threatening to crush me under its enormity. As I turned to face them, I could feel their eyes upon me, their concern palpable in the air. I knew I had to be strong, to keep it together for my own sake. But when I saw the sadness etched on their faces, my composure wavered. I took a deep breath and pointed towards a small house in the distance, my heart aching at the thought of leaving them behind. But I had no choice. For now, the two of you go over there. Bring Dad's body with you, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Nola's eyes widened in shock as she spoke up, her voice thick with emotion. You're leaving? I nodded, unable to meet her gaze. I want to stay with you too, but I can't. There are things I need to do and I can't afford to waste time here. The words left a bitter taste in my mouth, and I regretted them almost immediately. Nola's reaction was swift and fierce, her grief and anger boiling over. Dad just died, damn it. She cried, her voice growing louder and more desperate with each passing moment. Did you seriously say that staying here with Dad is a waste of time? What's wrong with you? No, wait. I flinched at her words. This wasn't what I had meant, but how could I explain that to her in the midst of her pain? Nola, calm down. My mother intervened, trying to defuse the situation. But she was beyond reason, her emotions raw and unbridled. No. Mom, why are you taking his side? Did you not hear what he said? He thinks being with us is a waste of his time. Stop it. That's not what he meant and you know it. She said strongly, her arms wrapping around Nola's trembling form. So what did he mean? Nola demanded, her eyes flashing with fury. I met my mother's gaze, silently pleading for her to handle the situation. She nodded her head, a subtle signal that she was with me. Stop, let's listen to your brother. We're only a burden to him now. No, fuck you. Damn it. Let me go, Mom. Nola trashed under my mother's arms, but she was perfectly restrained by her and she continued to glare at me. Fine, go. Nola finally relented, unable to escape from our mother's grasp. The tears that streamed down from her eyes were masked by the gentle raindrops in the sky. Nola's body limped over in our mother's arms and she finally wailed. You are, Dad. W.I. I averted my gaze from her while simultaneously biting my lower lip and turning my head to look in a particular direction. My vision began to blur and the next thing I knew, I was floating on top of the vast sea that encircled the island. Silence returned to my surroundings and when I thought back at what just happened I started to hyperventilate. Hiya. Not yet. I had to force myself once again, but unlike before, it proved to be a much harder task. The pain, it was a lot harder to mask than I thought. Fuck. Cursing out loud made the situation a bit better, but it was not enough. I needed to vent. I needed to let out what was built up in me and slowly the pain that I was feeling turned into something else. Rage. It was a rage unlike any other and right then as if something within me snapped, the world around me turned completely gray and I felt endlessly calm. Extending my hand in a certain direction, the waves beneath me quaked and the sky rumbled. Rumble. I quickly brought my hand down as the projection of a massive sword soon materialized on the surface of the sky. Do you see it? Jezebeth's voice loudly echoed within the space the two of them were in. His gaze was currently fixed on a certain projection. Nothing escaped from his grasp and he was able to see everything that was happening within the pillars. What happened is a consequence of your decision. Jezebeth wanted to see a reaction from Run, but even as his own father died he showed no such reaction. It frustrated Jezebeth to no end, and he knew that the man in front of him was not someone who would be influenced by such tricks. It looks like I've severely underestimated how the situation is. He scratched the back of his head, annoyed. Just then he noticed something trickling down the side of Ren's mouth. It was blood. Jezebeth's eyes widened in surprise at the sight. Oh. A smile finally returned to his face. Perhaps, you really are affected. You think too much. Ren responded coldly, unsheathing his sword and pointing it at Jezebeth. Rumble. The void between them trembled as Ren stepped forward, appearing in front of Jezebeth in a single stride. Turning his attention back to the projections, Ren caught sight of something that elicited a rare smile. Welcome to my world. Whether his words were meant for Jezebeth only he knew. Pillar of Envy. A particular spot within the pillars served as a slumbering area for the patriarchs. From within that room they were able to keep an eye on everything that was going on inside the pillar, and if something out of the ordinary occurred, they would immediately take action. It doesn't look like I'll have to make a move. Prince Murdoch, the patriarch of the clan of Envy, muttered something under his breath as he continued to stare at the projections in front of him. He was content with the circumstances at hand, and as he watched the demons slaughter members of the 4 races, a smile broke out on his face. It was a pleasant sight. What a nice sight. There was nothing that brought him more satisfaction than watching members of his race brutally murder members of the other races. He had only been a child when His Majesty had risen to power, but in those days he had seen how the situation was back then. It was the complete opposite of now, and the demons were the ones being hunted. He could still remember the time when he was forced to flee because of the other races. They had struggled, clawed their way to where they were now, and were now reaping the benefits of their hard work. Soon, he silently muttered, soon will be the only race that remains within the universe. And when that occurred, he would at long last be able to feel a sense of reassurance over his fallen comrades who had fallen at the hands of those who belonged to other races. Rumble-ay, rumble-ay, ha. But just as things appeared to be running smoothly, he was startled by a sudden tremor. The area on top of him was suddenly enveloped in pressure, and his expression changed to reflect the gravity of the situation. Who in the Boom. The ceiling collapsed above him, allowing water to fall into the room above him. While looking up, Prince Murdoch paid no attention to what was going on around him. It was then that he caught sight of a shadowy figure standing in the sky and staring down at him with an expression that he could only describe as complete indifference. I found you, he whispered in a low tone, his voice devoid of any emotion. Chapter 8:12 Prince Murdoch 1. Drip, drip. The rain continued to fall steadily, each droplet creating a ripple as it collided with the surface of the water. It was a dreary and ominous atmosphere that surrounded the 2 figures standing at the edge of the water. Their stillness only added to the sense of foreboding. Prince Murdoch warily stared at the figure before his eyes. He had never encountered anyone like this before. The stranger's appearance was shrouded in darkness, making it difficult for Murdoch to discern any distinguishing features. However, the sheer power emanating from the figure was palpable, sending chills down Murdoch's spine. Despite his wariness, Murdoch stood his ground, his expression stoic as he faced the shadowy figure. He spoke in a measured tone, trying to keep his composure. What are you? His voice was firm, but there was a hint of trepidation underlying his words. The figure remained silent, its dark form seemingly immobile. Not much of a talker, are we? Murdoch continued to scrutinize the figure, trying to glean any information he could from its appearance. The stranger appeared to be human in build, but there was all he could make out. I've never heard of a human as strong as you, nor a drip. He was interrupted by the subtle sound of a raindrop hitting the water, which resounded through the air unlike any of the other drops around him. Swoosh. In that split second, the shadowy figure vanished from where it was standing. Swoosh. Murdoch's eyes widened in surprise as he felt a sudden force against his cheek. He stumbled backward, narrowly dodging a swift punch aimed at his face. Rather hurried, aren't we? Murdoch quipped, trying to regain his composure. As he distanced himself from the shadowy figure, Murdoch noticed a cold glint reflecting off a blade being unsheathed. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks, but it was too late. Murdoch's gaze met with the figures, and time seemed to come to a standstill. The only sound was the raindrops falling around them. Drip. Ting. In that moment, Murdoch watched in horror as his arm was sliced clean off by the blade. The pain was intense and he could feel warm blood gushing out of the wound. Spurta. Black blood spurted out, staining the water and adding to the eerie atmosphere. Murdoch could barely comprehend what had just happened. He looked up at the shadowy figure, whose features were still obscured by the darkness. Arg. He eventually succumbed to the agony and let out an agonized scream as a result. He glared at the figure in the shadows while clutching his right hand, and he flapped his wing once. The outline of his figure became fuzzy, and then he materialized in front of him. His arm, which had disappeared earlier, reappeared, and he reached out his hand with the intention of hitting the shadowy figure in the head. Swoosh. Unfortunately, he passed directly through his body, and when he turned around he saw him standing a few hundred meters away with his sword again pointed at him. Fast. That was all Prince Murdoch could think about at that moment. Staring at the tip of the sword that was pointed at him, he was just about to take a step forward when he suddenly twisted his body. Ting. Right then, a silver streak flew past the area that he was previously in, and when he turned his head he caught a glimpse of the space behind him. It was cracked. So that's how it is, he murmured to himself as he analyzed the movement. All it took was a glimpse for him to understand what had happened, and he instantly calmed down. He had faced many skilled opponents before, and he knew that the key to victory was to remain calm and focused. Your mastery, oh, he started to say, but his expression shifted mid-sentence, and he moved his body to the right, narrowly avoiding the tip of the blade that brushed past his cheek. A smile crept up on his face as he glanced at the passing blade. Now that he understood how it worked, he wasn't as worried as before. However, he knew that he couldn't let his guard down. Ting. That said, the attacks were relentless, coming at him from all sides. Just as another blade passed by his body, he flapped his wings and appeared before the shadowy figure. With his hand outstretched, he aimed his claws at his face. Swoosh. Unfortunately for him, the figure ducked down and counterattacked with a punch, aimed directly at his abdominal area. Prince Murdoch knew that he had to act quickly if he wanted to avoid the blow. Hup. Right as the fist was about to make its way toward his stomach, Prince Murdoch twisted his body, and the fist grazed past his back. Boomy. Boomy. The aftermath of their fight fractured the water beneath them, and thunder began to crackle from the sky above. Prad. Prad. Boomy. Finally landing a fist against the shadowy figure, he flapped his wings and appeared right behind him. He didn't waste a second and kicked him down with his leg. Splash. The figure crashed against the water, diving deep under it. Prince Murdoch followed him down, his figure plummeting into the water beneath, and with one quick scan of the surroundings he managed to spot him. With the aid of his wings, he appeared right in front of the shadowy figure and clenched at his throat with his hand, pushing him further down under the water. The water around them distorted as the two plummeted down from above at high speeds and bubbles followed their trails. Boomy. The two of them crashed deep under the ocean, sand spilling around the area they were in. When the sand settled, Prince Murdoch's figure was revealed, standing above the shadowy figure with his hand at his throat. He had the upper hand now and he knew it. Tell me. He spoke, holding tightly onto his neck. He could snap it at any second. Despite the situation he was in, the shadowy figure looked at him with a calm look, seemingly unbothered by the predicament he was in. This left the prince unsettled, but he brushed it toward the back of his head as he had many questions he wanted answered. Who are you? What race are you from? W. Pratchett. The prince was in the middle of a sentence when he heard a crunching sound and felt intense pain. When he looked down, he saw that a portion of his hand had been bitten off, and his expression quickly morphed. Arg! He screamed, bubbles rising from his mouth, and finally let go of his throat. The shadowy figure quickly appeared behind the prince, and his fist connected against the prince's back. Boomy. The impact reverberated through the water as the prince was thrown back, crashing against a couple of rocks in the distance. The rocks shattered upon impact, sending several fish scattering out of the area. The shadowy figure appeared before the prince once more, brandishing a sword in hand and pointing it back at him. Shit. The prince muttered under his breath, his pupils dilating as he realized the gravity of the situation. Ting. The shadowy figure struck again with a force and speed that took the prince by surprise. The prince tried to dodge, but it was too late. He felt a searing pain in his hand as one of his fingers was severed, and black blood diffused into the water. The prince was in shock. How is this possible? He wondered. Ting. The figure struck again, and the prince barely managed to evade the attack. He flapped his wings and disappeared from where he was, leaving a long line across the space where he was a moment before. I didn't see wrongly. He muttered under his breath. This is serious. The realization hit him hard. His opponent's attacks were getting stronger and faster. The prince swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the shadowy figure. He felt his core palpitate as he realized the extent of his opponent's power. He knew he had to take this seriously. The water trembled as demonic energy suddenly rose from the prince's body, enveloping the area around him. His black hair fluttered under the water and his gaze turned utterly calm. He studied the figure standing opposite him, closed his eyes for a moment and then reopened them. When he did, he caught sight of a familiar back and he opened up his palm and reached out for the back. I got you, he thought, but unfortunately the figure reacted in time. With that said, the prince's movements were faster. His finger just barely managed to touch its back before the figure shot up like a rocket, leaving the water behind. The prince closed his eyes again, and when he opened them he was right above the water, directly on top of the shadowy figure hurtling towards him. He didn't think much after that and raised his hand. In one simple motion he clawed down and the shadowy figure split into 3 pieces. Swoosh! The sound of the strike echoed through the air as the pieces fell into the water with a subtle splash. "A pity," muttered the prince, staring at the dissected pieces of the shadowy figure. His breath was steady, and the fight had only lasted for a couple of minutes, but in the short period of time, the prince experienced a sensation that he had never felt in a very long time, with the exception of the times he met with His Majesty. Fear. He had come dangerously close to losing this battle, and if not for that last movement of his, he would have found himself in a precarious situation. Drip, drip. The only sound that remained was the sound of the rain beside him, occasionally muffled by the thunder in the distance. Tearing his gaze away from the water, the prince frowned as he muttered to himself, "I should report this to His Majesty." He was interrupted mid-sentence as he sensed a presence behind him. His head snapped behind and his eyes opened widely as his pupils constricted. How?" the prince exclaimed. For the first time in a very long time, the prince lost his composure as he looked at the shadowy figure that stood in the air behind him. The air around him chilled and the shadowy figure finally opened his mouth, his voice echoing ominously through the air. "Give up, I can't die." Chapter 813 Prince Murdoch 2. Cut my throat, slash my body, cut my limbs. I can't die. Dark Servant was a skill that consisted in creating a body made out of pure mana. Being a skill, so long as there was mana supplying the skill, the Dark Servant was technically invincible. Unless the user ran out of mana or the mana was directly cut off, there was simply no way to kill Ren. But that was the thing. Ren's body was being sustained by his other self, a fact that weighed heavily on him. Each time he died he took the mana from the other him who was fighting against Jezebeth. He was invincible, but at the same time his actions held a considerable weight on the outcome of the real fight that was taking place. As Ren stood there, his body slowly regenerating, his thoughts raced. He knew that he couldn't allow himself to die again like before. While he couldn't see how the situation between his other self and Jezebeth was unfolding, he knew that his death could have made the situation a lot more difficult for his other self. Ren's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the prince's voice. "So you can't be killed, huh?" The prince's words gently traveled through the air, reaching Ren's ears. When Ren looked down he was met with a smile. "You can't die, but can you kill me?" the prince asked. The smile on his face deepened as he looked around him. He no longer looked as lost as he did before. "I can tell that you're here to get me, but will you really be able to kill me? I've already got a grasp of your strength. Just like I can't kill you, you can't kill me. I'm sure you can tell that too." The prince looked up, his gaze meeting with Ren's once more. "So that gives rise to the question. What are you doing here? Are you perhaps trying to stall for time? Perhaps keep me in check while others are." Stall for time. Ren's cold words echoed within the air, cutting the prince's words. Raising his head and letting the raindrop fall on his face, his mouth parted open. "Keep you in check?" he muttered again. The water beneath him split apart and water particles flew in the air. The space around him started to distort massively as his figure suddenly vanished from the spot, reappearing right before the patriarch of the Envy clan. Appearing right in front of him with his sword pointed at Prince Murdoch's brows, Ren's face distorted to an unbearable degree and his voice raised. "Why? Rumble. The world around him started to lose color, and his body flickered with a white light as demonic energy and mana sprouted out of his body. The entire world seemed to come to a sudden standstill as the raindrops around him stopped, and his figure started to change. Right then, the projection of a huge sword appeared from within the space itself, coming out in a rapid manner until its full body was revealed. The world fluctuated at the power held within the sword, and Prince Murdoch's expression crumbled. This power. Standing right beneath the sword, Ren coldly gazed at Prince Murdoch. His entire body was hazy, and the mana inside his body was depleting at a faster rate than it was replenishing, but even so, for the first time ever, Ren had managed to use the sixth movement as a whole. The result was a power that was far beyond what he had ever expected. Clenching his hand tightly, his figure became even hazier, but he didn't care as black threads floated out from his body and merged against the sword in the sky. The pressure that came out of it further intensified and the pillar shook. Rumble-a, rumble-a. The rumbling didn't last for long as Ren's hand soon relaxed, and the world turned completely quiet. Opening his mouth, Ren muttered, "Fall." What's wrong?" Ren and Jezebeth faced each other, the tension thick between them. Jezebeth's figure suddenly appeared before Ren. The calm smile on Jezebeth's face belied the power that emanated from him. With a quick motion, Jezebeth touched his forehead, and Ren was hurled through the air, crashing through an invisible film that shattered like glass and revealing a verdant green world behind. Boomy. The verdant green world that appeared was peaceful and serene, but it was short-lived as Ren crashed into the ground, shattering trees and creating a large crater. Jezebeth looked down at Ren with a cocked head, studying him carefully. "At first I was taken aback by his appearance in the pillars, but now that I look at you," he said, his arms extending out as he chuckled. "I think you've shot yourself in the foot. Not only is your mana rapidly depleting, but it looks like you're injured as well." Ren slowly stood up, feeling the effects of the battle taking its toll on him. His entire body was sluggish, and the mana inside of his body was depleting at an alarming rate. He understood that he didn't have much time left. But he didn't show any sign of emotion, even as Jezebeth extended his arms and taunted him. "And here I am completely unharmed and yet to use my full strength. From the looks of things I was worried for nothing." Jezebeth may have sounded confident, but in reality he was cautious. How could he not be? He knew Ren better than anyone else and had died at his hands countless times. He was the only one in the universe who could actually make him fear something, and whatever was happening at the moment was just a smokescreen. "I wonder what you're planning." Jezebeth knew that Ren had something planned, but he didn't know what it was. That uncertainty was what made him fear Ren. Crack, crack, crack. Ren didn't waste any time as he pointed his sword at Jezebeth, shattering the space around him and revealing hundreds of swords that stabbed at him. But Jezebeth was too quick, shattering the swords with a wave of his hand before freezing the space around Ren. With a single step, Jezebeth appeared before Ren, but this time his finger passed right through Ren's figure, which turned out to be an afterimage of himself. "You sure run fast," Jezebeth commented with a smile before knocking on the air to his right with the back of his fist. Bang! The space shattered and Ren was sent hurtling toward the ground once again, crashing into the verdant world below. Jezebeth approached Ren once more, his calm gaze looking down at him. "Stop playing around. I know very well this isn't the full extent of your power. Is this some sort of ploy? Perhaps." Jezebeth didn't finish his sentence as he thought of something, his expression turning frosty. Right, you couldn't be stalling for time, could you?" He struck his palm toward Ren, unleashing a force that shattered the space around it and revealed a different world entirely. The impact of the strike was beyond what the world could take, and the sound of the explosion echoed in the air. Boom! Ren was hit in the abdomen and sent flying once more. This time the sound of shattering glass filled the air, and invisible shards floated in the space around them. Within the shards were reflections of the verdant green world they were previously in, but behind them lay a whole new world, one that was drastically different from the previous one. The land was covered in red and magma covered a major part of it, distorting the air with its heat. Boom! Ren crashed next to one of the volcanoes in the world and Jezebeth stopped to observe him carefully. Despite the beatings he had taken, Ren's figure remained largely unharmed. He had noticed during the last two attacks that just when his attacks were about to land, he'd move his body slightly back in order to reduce the impact of his attacks. "What are you planning?" Jezebeth thought, his gaze unable to read through Ren's. The quieter he was and the more advantage he had, the more unsettled Jezebeth became. "You." Clenching his teeth, Jezebeth glared at Ren and he extended his hand forward. A terrifying energy surrounded his entire body at that moment, and he no longer held back. Bending his body back, he appeared in front of Ren and punched with everything he had. "Are seriously annoying." "Womay." His fist flew forward, and right as it was about to hit Ren cleanly in the face, with a swift dodge to the side he pressed his palm against his forearm, redirecting Jezebeth's fist toward the ground. Boom! The impact was deafening, causing the ground to shake and sending shockwaves through the air. Everything tore apart the moment that his fist hit the ground, and just as Jezebeth was about to attack once more, a knee appeared within his vision. It grew with each passing second and soon hit him cleanly in the nose. Bang! Ugh! Jezebeth stumbled back several steps. When he finally stopped, he lowered his head to stare at Rin, who was looking at him from the distance. He wiped his nose with his arm, feeling a wet substance on the back of his hand. A dark liquid stained his skin. It took no time for him to realize what the substance was, and he felt his lips curl at the sight. Good. He pressed his foot forward, appearing right before Rin. It looks like you're finally taking things seriously. Chapter 814 Prince Murdoch 3. Pillar of Envy. Wame. The moment the gigantic sword appeared in the air, the structure of the pillar shook. The waters crashed against each other and waves the size of skyscrapers started to form. Prad. Lightning came pouring down from the sky and the rain stopped moving. What's this? Prince Murdoch's expression changed dramatically at the sight of the sword, and his entire body started to morph at that moment. His wings expanded, his skin changed as scales forming on top of it, and his entire body became larger. Long gone was the elegant demon from before, as what replaced it was a hulking figure whose presence towered just like the sword in the sky. Crack-a. A lightning came down and Rin and Prince Murdoch gazed at each other. The world was quiet at that moment, and just as everything seemed peaceful, Ren's mouth parted open. Fall. What's that? It started with a distant rumble, barely noticeable at first. But as it grew louder, those within the island realized that something was terribly wrong. They looked out to sea and saw an enormous wall of water rising higher and higher, heading straight towards them. At that moment, silence swept over the entire world. All of those within the pillar were unable to stop themselves from looking at the commotion, and their gazes paused on the large wall of water that surrounded the entire island. They also noticed the two that were responsible for all of this, and their bodies stiffened right then. Wame. Suddenly, a massive sword projection materialized in the sky, glowing with an eerie, pulsating light. It hung there, suspended for a few moments before starting to descend towards the earth with terrifying speed. The sword was enormous, easily as long as a city block, and it blazed with an otherworldly energy that made the air around it crackle with electricity. As it fell, it sliced through clouds and stars alike, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Everyone halted their breaths as they looked at the sky, which had become empty almost instantly. Prince Murdoch had not attacked yet, but his aura had already pressed on everyone's heart like a mountain. Rumble. When the sword started to fall, the entire pillar shook, and the waves came hurling toward the land like enormous tsunamis. Panic set in as the realization of what was about to happen hit them. Many backed away from the shore, but there was nowhere to go. The wave was too large, too powerful. Splash! Within moments, it crashed onto the shore, sending water and debris flying in all directions. Wherever the water swept, only disaster was left behind as the house and trees disappeared quickly. Move back. Retreat quickly. Letting go of whatever they were doing, everyone retreated further into the island. Those who could flew in the sky, but such individuals numbered far less than those that couldn't, and the water continued to flood the entire island, slowly submerging it. Drip. Rain continued to pour down from the sky, and anguished cries reverberated through the air. Is this your trump card? Prince Murdoch shouted, turning his gaze away from the island. He could hear the anguished screams of his soldiers and those from the three races. While he wasn't one to sympathize with the death of his soldiers, he was shocked to find out that the human in front of him was even more ruthless than him. In order to defeat him, he spared nothing and even put his own people in danger. But even the prince found himself impressed by such ruthlessness. Not that he had very long to be impressed as the sword slowly started to make its way toward him. Wame. The space around the sword distorted, and so did Prince Murdoch's expression. Glaring at the large sword that was headed his way, a wave of demonic energy burst forth from his body, enveloping half of the island. The waves which were crashing on the people came to a sudden stop, and the demons beneath suddenly stopped moving. It all happened within an instant, but the demons that stopped moving suddenly started to shrivel up like mummies before falling down to the ground lifeless. Thump. Such scenes happened throughout the entire island, and before long, thousands of demons fell to the ground lifeless. In the meantime, the power that surrounded Prince Murdoch increased, and his body bulged even further. Clenching his teeth tightly, Prince Murdoch glared at the approaching sword and concentrated all of his power on his right hand. All of this happened within the span of a few seconds, and just as the sword was about a few inches away from his face, he brought his hand forward and his hand reached for the sword. Coming into contact with the sword, the entire space around him shattered, and the sword hummed with a deadly light. Walk. Blood leaked out from the prince's orifices, and his body was pushed back onto the ground. He let out several agonized shouts as his right hand continued to grasp onto the sword. His complexion paled by the second and it became progressively worse by the second. But despite the change in his complexion, the sword did slow down quite a lot. Even more shocking was that with each passing second, it slowed down even further, and it wasn't long before it completely stopped. Itchy. Sword in hand, Prince Murdoch let out several gasps, but his face was unable to hide the hint of glee he felt as he raised his head weakly to stare at Run. Is this yours? Boom. A soft voice drifted into his ears and his expression froze. Before he could understand the meaning of those words, the world around him turned white, and a defeating explosion reverberated throughout the world. Boomy. Jezebeth hurled back, his feet planted against the volcanic ground. Lowering his head, he looked up at Run and smiled. At the same time, he moved his hands behind his back. He was trying to hide the fact that they were currently trembling. Are you finally taking things seriously? In contrast to before, when he was just beating Run up, he had finally started to throw attacks of his own. While they had no major effect on him, they still did hurt quite a bit. Even so, Jezebeth didn't think for 1 second this was the full extent of his powers. Swoosh. Taking a step forward, he caught sight of Ren's back and he thrust his palm toward it. It was a quick and precise attack that left Ren with no room to dodge, but just as he thought the attack had landed, he was disappointed to see that it had hit nothing but air. Swoosh. His figure disappeared like the drift of the wind. Turning his head, he caught sight of Ren standing a few meters away from him and he smiled in annoyance. You sure know how to avoid me. There had been a lot of dodging from Ren in this fight of theirs. You're definitely planning something, aren't you? Stalling for time? Just what is that you're trying to do? His intentions became obvious to Jezebeth, who was used to fighting against him. In their many fights, never had their fights been this one-sided. He knew himself and Ren too well to understand that there was something up about the situation. I don't know why. PFE. It was an unexpected turn of events that caught Jezebeth off guard. In a big way, as his expression loosened for a moment. A moment prior, the tension in the air was thick as Jezebeth readied himself for another attack from Ren. But as he moved to strike, Ren's complexion suddenly changed and he clutched his hand to his mouth. Jezebeth watched in shock as blood trickled from Ren's fingers, staining the ground beneath them. It was a strange sight, one that he had only seen on a couple of occasions. Since when did you become so weak? This was strange. Ren was usually strong and composed, always one step ahead of him. But now he seemed to be barely holding on. If not for the fact that he knew him well, he would have thought that this was the result of his attacks. Just what sort of game are you playing? Was this some sort of ploy from him again? Or was there something more to the sudden situation? Jezebeth squinted his eyes, unable to hide his expression. Perhaps he had grown paranoid due to the many times he had fallen under his schemes, but Jezebeth couldn't quite brush off the feeling that something was wrong. Rumble. It was then that it happened. A faint tremor hit the ground and Jezebeth blinked his eyes a couple of times. He closed his eyes and tried to feel for the source of the tremor. Strange. Why do I f? Hastily raising his head, hundreds of projections depicting the happenings of the pillars appeared before his eyes, and his gaze fell on a gigantic sword that appeared in one of those very projections. It was long and stretched all the way up in the sky, its tip aimed at a certain demon within the projection. The moment Jezebeth gazed at the sword, his head snapped downwards and his eyes met with Ren's. How can he? The power that he felt from that sword. How was it possible for a clone to be able to do that? Don't look so surprised. For the very first time in a while, Ren's lips curled and Jezebeth's stomach churned. Pointing his sword right at Jezebeth, he mumbled. We've only just gotten started. Chapter 8:15 Prince Murdoch 4. Surprised? Just gotten started. Jezebeth mumbled Ren's words over and over again while covering his mouth with his hand. As his whole body shook, his posture became increasingly hunched over. KHKHK. The words were so unexpected that he couldn't help but burst out laughing. His laughter started out as a series of muffled cries, but it quickly grew into something more. It wasn't a boisterous laugh, but it had a depth to it that reverberated throughout the world. By the time he was done laughing, tears had formed in the corners of his eyes. Tau this. He wiped the tears from his eyes, fixing his gaze on Ren. This is the way things ought to play out. And here I was getting concerned that everything was going a little too smoothly for me. Jezebeth felt genuinely relieved. The scariest thing was the unknown. Something that Ren specialized in. What wasn't scary was the known, and now that he knew what Ren's plan was, he no longer felt as wary as before. Having said that, he didn't let his guard down. Turning his head to stare at the projections, Jezebeth smiled. So this is your plan? Within one of the projections, the only thing he could see was the color white, and although he couldn't exactly tell what was going on inside, he already had an idea. He smiled while pondering. It isn't a bad plan, but... Turning his head to look at Ren, he shook his head. Never mind, I'm sure you've already worked everything out in your head. Your years of experience should have prepared you to recognize certain facts by now. I suppose the only thing I can do is try to move things along more quickly. Clenching his fist, the air around Jezebeth trembled. Staring directly at Ren, he punched out. Whammy. It didn't matter where his fist went. The space around it would shatter, and a whole new world would reflect in the broken pieces of space. This time, it was a snow-covered plain with rocky outcrops. Drizzle. Drizzle. Water drizzled down from the sky once the whiteness of the world faded. An utter silence encompassed the world, only broken by the muffled drizzle from above. Still alive. A certain voice broke the silence. Slowly descending from the sky, Ren's gaze paused on a small figure laying beneath the ocean floor. Over half of his body was torn and his eyes were completely white. Stepping onto the surface of the water, he bent his body slightly. He calmly studied the demon beneath, his gaze fixed on his white eyes. He was still alive, but his condition wasn't good. He was barely holding on to his own life. So this is how strong the sixth movement is. Ren inwardly muttered, staring at his hands which had become transparent. For the first time he could remember, he had finally used the sixth movement, and the power contained within it was something that was well beyond his expectations. To say this was beyond his expectations was a lie. He had seen what it could do against the Protector and thus could tell exactly how powerful it was. Splash. Submerging himself into the water, Ren sank down until he stood right above Prince Murdoch. He was just about to end things when all of a sudden, Prince Murdoch's gaze cleared, and his hand sharply reached for his neck. Swoosh. Ren was able to take a step back just in time to avoid the unexpected attack. You're still fine. Ren was taken aback the most by the sight of Prince Murdoch standing before him with his entire body completely restored to health. He felt his heart sink. Swoosh. What surprised him the most was the fact that Prince Murdoch seemed completely unresponsive. As though something had taken over his body. Just as Ren was beginning to wonder what it was, his entire body suddenly froze in place, and golden runes and words began to form around him and then wrap themselves around his body, immobilizing him. When he looked up, he was astounded to see a fine white film covering the body of the prince. Wait, this. The power of the laws. He recognized the runes and the golden words the very instant that they made their appearance. How is this? Ren fell into a state of utter shock. Many questions flooded his mind at the moment, but he had no time to dwell on them as two sharp claws made their way toward him. Swoosh. The water tore apart and in its place was a long trail of bubbles. Clamped by the laws, Ren had a hard time moving his body, and just as the claws were about to reach his face, he clenched his teeth and cursed. Fuck it. A white glow that was eerily similar to the prince's emanated from his entire body, and at the same time golden runes materialized on the arm of the prince, holding it in place. The golden runes that were encircling Ren's body shattered, and his body, which was already transparent, became even more see-through. Gritting his teeth, Ren felt something inside of him tear apart and felt the connection between him and Dark Servant wane. As a result, his movements froze for a fraction of a second, but he was able to maintain his composure and press his palm against the prince's abdomen. As soon as his palm touched the prince's abdomen, golden runes appeared all over his body, and he vanished from the spot, careening off into the distance and crashing into a number of distant rocks. Thump. Rin was just about to follow him when he suddenly noticed that he couldn't move. When he looked down, he was stunned to discover that his legs had completely vanished, and he fell face first against the sand beneath him. Supporting himself with his hands, Rin was just able to support himself. Not yet. He could tell that the connection between him and his other self had significantly weakened as a result of his actions, and he came perilously close to actually passing away, but he was powerless to stop himself. There was something inside of him that had snapped completely, and within his vision, the only thing that existed was the prince. He needed to die. Ugh. He pushed himself up by pressing his hand against the sand, and his legs slowly began to reappear. As he stumbled forward, he eventually arrived before the prince. Smack. Bending down on one knee, he slapped him on the face a couple of times. That didn't do much, as the prince didn't seem to wake up. He's completely out of it. Rin mused, distancing himself from the demon. That was Yucca. Until Prince Murdoch's eyes finally gained clarity, and he audibly gasped while submerged in water. Ren's head turned to face him and their gazes met. Why you? He was immediately met with the terrified gaze of the demon. With his hands behind him, the prince tried to back away from him. It was a futile attempt as his back touched the rock behind him. Seeing such a powerful demon who was once hailed as one of the strongest existences beneath Jezebeth and the Protectors, cowering right in front of his eyes, Rin found an inexplicable feeling in that expression. Taking a step toward him, he caught up to him rather quickly, and his hand grasped at his throat. Why you? What are you doing? You had the chance to kill me, so why didn't you? Are you trying to play with me? The demon was in a state of panic. Long gone was his calm and collected gaze from before. What replaced it was one of utter fear and indignation. What are you trying to ace? Quiet. Ren's words cut through his, and Prince Murdoch found himself unable to utter a single word. Grasping tightly at his neck, Ren brought his face near his and he softly whispered. There's only one reason I'm still keeping you alive. He muttered silently, his eyes hazy. It's because you don't deserve to die so easily. You need to suffer a bit. Bang. He smashed the prince's head against the bedrock beneath. With the same haze in his eyes, he brought his head up and, bang. He smashed it against the ground once more. Bang. And again. Bang. And again. Bang. He smashed relentlessly. The surface of the water shook with each smash, and like a machine he continued for what seemed like an eternity. Only stopping when the prince's face was completely mangled, and he let out soft, pleading whispers. Hugh. Letting out a breath, bubbles flew out of Ren's mouth. Closing his eyes, he gazed upwards toward the surface of the water and then looked back down at Prince Murdoch. I've wasted too much time already. He clenched his fist hard. So hard that veins protrude from them. Nonetheless, it served no purpose in calming his current mind. He needed more. He needed to vent even more. Thus, he reached out for the prince's core. Spurta. Black blood spilled out into the ocean the moment he removed the core, and after calmly observing it for a good couple of minutes, he clenched his hand. Sear. Crack. The orb shattered into thousands of pieces, scattering into the water. In that brief moment, Rin caught his own reflection on one of the shards that belonged to the core. He wasn't able to look at himself for very long as the water he was in started to rumble. 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 No, the structure as a whole was trembling, not just the water. Initially, the trembling was faint, but it grew stronger with each passing second. A couple of seconds later, the entire structure was violently swaying. Rin didn't need to look outside to know what was currently happening. He was just about to leave when he caught sight of a certain yellow orb levitating over the prince's disappearing body. Feeling the power contained within it, he reached out for it. At the same time, the prince's body crumbled and turned into a black orb that Rin put away. Almost immediately after he reached for the yellow orb, his entire body began to tremble, his previously transparent form began to solidify, and power began to surge within him. His mastery of the laws began to advance at an alarming rate, and golden runes began to encircle his body. The transformation lasted only a few seconds, and when it was complete, Ren's entire demeanor changed. He seemed to have blended in with the world completely. Waving his hand forward, he appeared in front of a small house and entered it. In there he could see what remained of his family and he closed his eyes. "Let's go." His voice drifted into the room and he felt two sets of eyes focus on him. Without looking at them, he waved his hand and the scenery before them changed. They materialized above the island. There they could see tens of thousands of demons fleeing in terror as well as members of the four races. Ren's gaze was fixed on the demons and monsters that were squirming on the island, and after a few seconds of staring at them he swept his hand through the air, causing a significant portion of them to vanish. Most of the ones that died were just about Baron rank if not lower. He didn't even need to move to kill them. The same couldn't be said for the more powerful demons who were able to survive the attack. Of course Ren didn't care. He only killed the weaker ones in order to make things easier for those of the Alliance. Rumble-a, rumble-a. The entire structure of the pillar continued to shake. The shaking became progressively worse, and within a minute of it starting, the land started to shake even more violently, and the island soon started to split apart. The island was gradually submerged as water began to make its way onto it in a slow but steady process. The waves carried any debris that was left over from the buildings that had been destroyed due to the battles that had taken place above. Soon after, cracks began to appear in the sky, and just as the water was about to reach those that had managed to survive, the sky completely shattered into fragments. Crash. Almost immediately, everyone's vision changed, and when Ren's vision returned to normal, he found himself outside of the pillar. He then watched as the structure cracked and crumbled downward in a rapid manner. Boomy. A wave of dust flew into the air at that moment as Ren slowly closed his eyes. "That's one," he muttered silently.